workshop, and I'm just going to introduce the speakers very quickly. So our speakers are Patrick McGrath, Emily Bailey, Mubeena Mirza, and Katie O'Dunn. Dr. McGrath has a PhD in psychology, and he serves as a chief clinical officer for NOCD. Dr. Bailey obtained her doctorate in clinical psychology from Mercer University and is currently working at the Anxiety Treatment Clinic in Atlanta, Georgia. Mubeena Mirza is a licensed clinical social worker and is involved in the IOCDF Faith and OCD Task Force. And Reverend O'Dunn is the founder of Faith and Mental Health Integrative Services and is currently pursuing her doctorate at Vanderbilt. Without further ado, we can go ahead and get started, and please give them a round of applause.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for having us, and we're really excited to be here with you. And I would love, I'm sharing my screen and want to make sure that everybody can see it. Can everyone see the religious scrupulosity as a subtype of OCD slide? Can I get a thumbs up or something? Okay, perfect. I see thumbs ups. Okay, awesome. Well, really excited to be here with this group, and this is such a significant topic. I know for me, I always like to note on the personal front in getting started with these that I have OCD, and I'm an interfaith chaplain who served for a long time with students from lots of different faith backgrounds. And for a long time in that role, I was very private about my OCD. I was working with students, particularly my Muslim students, as they navigated OCD and religious scrupulosity, which we're talking about today. But I had a lot of shame around it in my personal life. I felt like if they knew what I was experiencing or if they knew what I was going through, they wouldn't respect me in my role as a chaplain. But ultimately, I sought treatment, and treatment very much saved my life and gave me an opportunity to really share about a lot of these things with students. And the work that I do today around faith and OCD is very much inspired by many of my Muslim students who were brave enough to speak up about their own experiences of OCD and religious scrupulosity. So we're going to go ahead and dive into this, and we can keep this pretty free flowing. And I don't know how questions have worked traditionally, but I'm always happy to answer as we move through. And I just want to kick us off by sharing a little bit about what OCD is. Because I think oftentimes we hear about OCD in the media, we hear about OCD a lot of different places, and the way that we typically see it defined isn't what it actually is. And that was part of it for me, where I wasn't diagnosed for such a long time because I didn't know. I assumed it was some cute quirk that we often see in the media, which it's really not. So there really is nothing cute or quirky about OCD. It's a debilitating disorder defined by unwanted obsessions that terrify the sufferer and compulsions completed repeatedly to alleviate fear, guilt, anxiety, shame, disgust. So many different things can come up with this. So obsessions we define as unwanted, intrusive thoughts, images, or urges that trigger intensely distressing feelings. And compulsions then are behaviors an individual engages in to attempt to get rid of the obsessions or to decrease that level of distress, whatever it looks like. Now, sometimes obsessions relate to some things that we more commonly see in society that we see talked about, like contamination or organization. But other times it might relate to more taboo themes. It might relate to violent themes or sexual themes. Also might relate to religion, which is what we're talking about today. But I really want everyone to know that the themes that stick tend to be those that are most significant to the sufferer. So we're going to talk some today about why when someone's in a faith community and they have OCD, OCD might latch on to their faith tradition simply because it's the thing that's the most significant to them. And yet OCD is also ego dystonic, which means that it directly opposes everything that's significant to you or that you value. So intrusive thoughts in OCD that we'll talk about are just thoughts. On a biological level, we all have thoughts. We have happy thoughts, sad thoughts, violent, intrusive, strange. But folks with OCD tend to place more value on these thoughts and even become concerned that there's a small possibility that they could be true. And that's often why these compulsions come in to try to alleviate that. And when the time spent experiencing these obsessions and compulsions impedes functionality, that's when it starts to cross over into a disorder, often seen as the doubting disorder, because it makes you question and doubt everything significant to you, which can include faith. I think it's important to note as we get into the scrupulosity component, it's really just that scrupulosity is a subtype. Religious scrupulosity is a subtype of OCD where individuals might question their faith in some way, but it doesn't mean that it's a faith concern. It's rather a larger part of this doubting disorder that relates to this intolerance of uncertainty about anything significant and meaningful to you. So I'm going to turn it over now to Patrick, who's going to share a little bit more about scrupulosity and what that looks like as a subtype of OCD.
Thanks, Katie. So as Katie was saying, there's tons of subtypes with OCD. You could have the common ones we hear about, of course, are cleanliness. You know, did I wash my hands enough? I don't want to get a germ. I don't want to pass one on to someone else, or going back to check the lock to make sure the door's locked. You don't want anyone getting in, or you don't want, you know, the cat to get out. And if it did, Katie worries about this all the time. 12 cats. I don't know if anyone knew she has, no, never mind.
Ironically, I actually had this conversation last night about, is our cat going to get out? Are you sure?
There you go. See? So those types of things. But there can be scrupulosity as another subtype, and it can be in two ways. There's moral scrupulosity and religious scrupulosity. And sometimes they can be pretty linked to each other. But on the moral side, you're fearful that you've done something morally or ethically wrong. That really relates to more times interactions with other humans. And then on the religious scrupulosity side, there's fears you've done something potentially wrong or evil or had a blasphemous thought that could relate to how you interact with your higher power, or what might happen to you in an afterlife in some way as well too. So did I recite my prayers correctly? And if I didn't, does that mean that they will be rejected? So you will see people who will repeat the prayers over and over again until they were done absolutely perfectly just right. And of course, that's very difficult to achieve when you have OCD, because the doubting disorder doubts everything you've ever done, which means it's never going to feel absolutely 100% just right. And that's why we see that compulsion of repeating over and over again. What if I've offended the higher power that I believe in? We will see this happen a great deal as well too. And so a lot of asking for forgiveness. This is where prayers cross over from being prayers to becoming compulsions, right? And what people will do then is they will do these compulsive quote unquote prayers over and over again to try to achieve relief. But these are no longer prayers anymore. These are compulsions. These are things instantaneously done to receive this immediate gratification in the neutralization of the obsession that somebody is experiencing. What if what I did leads to an undesired afterlife? Will I be punished in some eternal life that I will have? And what can I do now to make up for it? We see all sorts of quotes of various types of scriptures where people will, you know, say, this says this, and if I did this, it means I'm doomed or something of that nature. Can you promise me that I didn't do that? What guarantee do I have that that didn't happen? And of course, we can't give somebody that type of guarantee. And they aren't necessarily always even worried that they did it. They're more afraid of, what if I had done it? What if I were to do it? What if I thought about it? You know, I describe anxiety as being two words. Those two words are what if, followed by the worst case scenario you can think of. What if has a cousin, which is yeah, but what if, which is always the answer after I hear the first what if, and then I give an answer to someone, it's followed by yeah, but what if. And this is why having kind of a standard talk therapy doesn't work so well for OCD. We'll get into that more as we go on today. I've worked with individuals who are afraid, what if it's Ramadan and I'm performing wudu and I swallowed some of the water? Does that mean that I drank during Ramadan during the daytime? And does that mean that I've committed some kind of horrible act according to my religion? And what do I need to do now to undo that? And what if I wanted to drink that water and I did it, and maybe it was a willful thing? And what if I willfully did that? I don't think I did, but what if it was? Or I've had amazing conversations about whispers from jinn with people who are of the Muslim faith and who I've treated who have scrupulosity, who think that these thoughts popping into my head must be a jinn that's going on in my life. So in explaining to people the kind of the role of what obsessions and compulsions are, it's been wonderful to work with individuals to help them get back into their faith life and not be so consumed by all of the various obsessions that they're experiencing all the time. Because you don't have to have a therapist of the same faith. You have to have a therapist who wants you to live in the faith life that you want to live in the best way possible, not being ruled by obsessive compulsive disorder.
I want to like cheer for that 10,000 times. And I want everyone to hear that that's what this is all about, is being able to recognize your beautiful faith and helping each individual live that out in a way that's authentic to them, not defined in any way by the disorder. Yeah, I don't like that. So I'll go ahead and Mubeena, I think you're going to share with us a little bit about what obsessions and compulsions might look like within Islam.
Right. So I'm going to go over some typical obsessions and compulsions that we see in Muslims. They generally fall into some categories of obsessions around practices or obsessions around belief, or sometimes even some existential obsessions. So a typical one that we see is that when somebody is making wudu, then they'll miss a spot and they'll have an urge to complete it to find that certainty that they got every spot when they're doing wudu. Another one that we see a lot of is when somebody's praying and they lose count in their rak'ah, they'll want to repeat the prayer, so they'll need that certainty. So as we know, we all lose our count sometimes when we're in prayer. On my second rak'ah or third rak'ah, and a person without OCD will know we can fall back on the ruling that you go with what you know. But a person with OCD has an urge, again, to find certainty. I need to know if I'm on my second or third, or else I'm sinning. Another typical one is people cleaning all the impurities off of themselves after they go to the bathroom. So people might spend hours in the bathroom cleaning, washing, wiping, making sure that they got everything off of themselves and their clothing. And for blasphemy, that's very common too. So a person might get an intrusive image of an idol, or while they're praying, they are afraid that they committed shirk. So then they'll oftentimes, need to find certainty that they're still Muslim after that. As we know, they might be taught that, committing blasphemy is the one unforgivable sin, and that might be looming over them, so that if they get that image in their head, then they'll want to find that certainty. And the last one is more of an existential question. We don't see this as often, but this is one that's easy to get caught up in a philosophical debate with a client, whether you're a specialist or not, or whether you're a clergy member. So this is a person who will question, what is destiny? How do I know that I have free will? How can I be certain that I have free will? How can I be certain that I have control over my destiny? Yeah. So now I'll go over the compulsions that we'll see. So we see people repeating wudu over and over and over again until they get a sense of certainty, either a feeling, a just right feeling, or they'll actually check to make sure they caught every inch of their compulsory body areas with water. Repeating prayers to make sure that they didn't make a mistake, cleaning and recleaning themselves after they use the bathroom. People oftentimes wash their clothes to make sure that there's no impurities on them, so that they're able to pray, staying on the toilet for long. So these are individuals who might try to make sure that they get all the urine or feces out of their body to make sure that they're ready for prayer. And then we see that people ask for reassurance from scholars, imams, loved ones, even from their therapists, that they're still Muslim, that things are all okay. So the way that OCD falls into this cycle. So how does obsessions and compulsions present in an individual? OCD has a reinforcing cycle And again, that's why we see that it needs actually the correct treatment, and we'll get into that in a little bit. An OCD cycle starts with a trigger. For example, it's time for prayer and a person needs to go pray. And they might get an intrusive thought. What if I didn't, recite a word in the prayer correctly? So with that intrusive thought comes a wave of anxiety, distress, discomfort, any uncomfortable feeling. And then there's also a belief about that obsession. So again, we all get intrusive thoughts. But with a person with OCD, there's a belief in the obsession, there's buy-in, there's meaning behind that intrusive thought. So they will need to have an urge to find certainty that that thought isn't true. And then a person will do a compulsion to relieve themselves of that distressing feeling. So in this example, a person will repeat their prayer or repeat words in their prayer over and over again until they feel that certainty that everything's fine, and they'll get a temporary relief from that feeling. Now, this is where the reinforcing happens. That sends a message in their brain that the trigger and the obsession was something to worry about. It increases in the brain that link between the thought and the behavior. So the trigger becomes more and more powerful each time.
So I'm going to be talking about evidence-based treatment for OCD, specifically exposure and response prevention. So what is exposure and response prevention? Exposure and response prevention is the gold standard first-line treatment for OCD, and it involves exposing an individual to situations they fear and engaging in response prevention, which is essentially just reducing or eliminating compulsions. So what does treatment look like? Just like what we've been doing. First, we're going to talk about what is OCD, what is the OCD cycle, and what's continuing to maintain these behaviors. And then we're going to discuss what is ERP and what does treatment look like. But from there, we're going to want to individualize it to the person and their experiences. So we're going to want to identify triggers, obsessions, compulsions, and even the amount of distress that they're in. And based off of that and based off the information we get, we collaboratively create something that we call a hierarchy. A hierarchy is just a list of different feared situations or exposures that the person can complete throughout the course of treatment. These exposures are meant to feel distressing and meant to feel anxious, so much so that we really want them to rate the level of distress that they expect to experience in each of these situations. And then treatment starts, right? We really want them to start on lower level exposures, meaning exposures that don't cause as much anxiety and distress. And there's a few reasons for this. The first one being, we really want to make sure that they're engaging in response prevention correctly, that they understand what response prevention is and how to essentially not engage in that compulsion. We also really want to build people's confidence. This is such a difficult thing to do. ERP, it can be so difficult at times, and we want to build their confidence that they have the ability to do this. So why does exposure work for individuals? So first of all, it helps individuals really learn that the triggers that they have aren't as dangerous as it feels like they are, or as they originally believed. But ERP really ultimately also helps patients learn to change their relationship with their OCD and anxiety and learn to function even though there's not ironclad certainty in what they're doing. So this is the exact same cycle that you literally just saw a few seconds ago. And what I did here was I crossed out the compulsion. So I'm trying to denote here that a lot of ERP is just focused on eliminating or reducing the compulsive behavior. We can't necessarily control all the thoughts that pop in our head. We have so many thoughts in a day that pop in our head. But what we can change is how we react and how we respond to the situations that we're in and the thoughts that we have, which is by addressing the compulsion. But exposure doesn't work for me. So I've heard this so many times when people come into my office, and they're like, this doesn't work. This isn't going to work for me. And sometimes patients believe that because they continue to experience like inadvertent like exposures, right? They inadvertently come up against their feared situation and still have intrusive thoughts, that means exposure won't work. And that's not necessarily true. And inadvertently exposing yourself to your fears is not the same as doing treatment. It's not the same as working with a clinician to do exposures. Exposures usually are intentional, prolonged, and repeated, right? So how can we as clinicians make that more effective for the patients that we're seeing? As clinicians, we want to make sure that we practice the situations that closely match the trigger that the individual has. We also want to use those exposures to test negative predictions. Oftentimes people are like, I'm not capable of handling this level of anxiety. So we're testing that, right? And then we want to continue the exposure until they learn that they are capable or that they can handle that exposure. Problem solving some barriers. Sometimes exposures don't trigger anxiety the way that we think they do. And there could be multiple reasons for that. So one of the reasons this happens is if the situation or obsession is not actually as distressing as predicted when we developed the hierarchy. In this case, awesome. Let's move to the next exposure. Let's just make it a little bit tougher. However, if somebody is also not experiencing anxiety, it could be a problem with how the exposure is being conducted. So maybe it's not really focused on the fear the person actually has. Or maybe the person is engaging in some sort of safety behavior that's making the exposure a little bit easier. So for example, if us as clinicians are seeing somebody suddenly have an increase in anxiety at the beginning of exposure and quickly and rapidly see a decrease in that anxiety, we want to assess, are we doing this exposure correctly? Is there any safety behaviors that are going on? Are they trying to neutralize their thoughts right now? Or are they ruminating over and over again? What are they doing that could be leading to a quick decrease in that anxiety? Another barrier to sometimes engaging in ERP is feeling really overwhelmed as a patient, emotionally overwhelmed. And if you haven't felt emotionally overwhelmed before, I'm sure we all have, it can be really difficult to learn and it can be really difficult to engage in triggering exposures. In this case, I always recommend take a break. This doesn't mean, and this isn't an excuse to stop an exposure. I think it's returning to the exposure or doing a lower level exposure if you're feeling really overwhelmed that day. So I feel like you always need to approach those exposures that are highly anxiety provoking, because the more anxiety you feel, the more likely you're surprised when you learn that you're capable of handling that situation. However, if someone is feeling overwhelmed, taking a break, taking a step back and reassessing what to do right now is always important as well. So I would rather have a small E and a big RP than a big E and a small RP. What does that even mean? So what I'm trying to say here is I would rather have someone engage in an exposure that's a little bit easier or a lower level exposure and completely response prevent. I mean, not engage in the compulsion at all or reduce the compulsion significantly, then have them engage in the toughest exposure that they have and engage in a compulsion, right? We want to teach our patients that they don't have to engage in a compulsion to feel safe and that they can tolerate the anxiety and distress that they feel. So I always try to start with a smaller exposure and really focus on that response prevention. Response prevention is the most important part. So trying to eliminate that compulsion is central to treatment. So just a reminder of what response prevention is. Response prevention is when we try to eliminate the compulsion completely or we try to reduce it in some way. Response prevention really works by giving a patient a chance to see that doing rituals or compulsions isn't the only option when an obsession shows up. And it teaches the patient that they don't need these compulsions to keep them safe or to manage their anxiety, that they can manage it on their own. But quitting compulsions cold turkey is way easier said than done. It's a really difficult thing to do, especially if it's something that is really you've been doing quite a while. So we can modify it and do approximations to completely eliminating the compulsion. One of the most common ones is delaying. So can I delay this compulsion for 5 more minutes? Can I wait 10 more minutes before I recite the prayer again, right? Or it could be limiting it in some way, restricting the amount of time you engage in the compulsion. I'm only doing this for 10 more minutes. I'm not going to go past that. More often though, we really try to modify the ritual or compulsion in some way, which may mean doing it wrong, right? The purpose of this is really to show that there's nothing really magical about this ritual. If you do it the wrong way, if you do the compulsion the wrong way, you're getting one step closer to not ritualizing at all. Really, we want to change some aspect of the compulsion that isn't what OCD wants. We want to challenge that in some way. So that is what we're trying to do when we're making approximations to completely eliminating the compulsion, is we're really, really trying to say, I'm not going to do it the way OCD wants to do it. I'm going to do it the way that I want to do it. Oh, family and friends and response prevention. I'm just going to start by saying, don't blame your friends, don't blame your family, but they may inadvertently really enable your OCD, typically through reassurance. Am I okay? Did I do something wrong? Did I sin? You know, what's going to happen to me? All of these are questions that are reassurance seeking. And I'm sure, as all of you know, our friends and family don't want us to be distressed. It's really tough for our family and friends to see us in a state where we're struggling. And so they try to fix it. They try to make it better. And that works in the real world. That's very helpful, but we have to target things a little differently when somebody has OCD or anxiety. So what we want to do is we want to think about, how can we tell our friends and family to support us in our OCD without having them change anything about their daily routine for us, so not accommodating us in any way? And how can we assure we're getting support, but not reassurance? So one thing I like to tell my patients is, it's really helpful if collaboratively with your therapist, you can come up with a supportive statement that your friends or family can say. So for example, this supportive statement may acknowledge the distress you're in, like, wow, I see OCD is really, really flaring up today. I see that you're really struggling with your anxiety right now. And then also conveying confidence that they can manage it. Like, I'm so confident that you can handle this right now, or I know that you can keep going on and I can keep pushing through this. So really coming up with a support statement that you can give your friends so that they're not reassuring you so much. So really want to shift that. We also want to shift the opinions that friends and family have of ERP. So really bringing family into therapy can be quite helpful, because occasionally they don't know what ERP is, and it can be quite odd to watch it happening, to face the fears that you have. So really bringing in your family, if you can, would be helpful. And I'm about to sign off, I promise, guys. I feel like I've been talking for a while. But will ERP make me less religious? This is the question I probably get the most. The short answer is no. The much longer answer is, ERP is not going to make someone less religious or less faithful in their beliefs. It's just not. The goal of treatment is to bring a person closer to their faith. On the other hand, like Katie said earlier today, OCD really tends to attach itself to the things we value most. And oftentimes that is our faith. So OCD wants to hijack that. It wants to hijack our faith. It wants us to do it the OCD way. So in treatment, we're really helping people learn to practice their faith in a way that aligns with their values versus their OCD. And clinicians who specialize in OCD, they shouldn't force you to do exposures that involve doing things that your faith forbids, or they shouldn't request that you give up the core beliefs of your faith. That's not treatment. Rather, we're helping patients learn how to follow the tenets of their faith versus the OCD skewed version of their faith. So one thing also is, it's important families know this as well. Sometimes families think that it's making the person less religious and will inadvertently tell them to not engage in treatment or not engage in ERP. So again, it's so important to bring family and friends and help them gain an understanding that you're actually trying to practice your faith to a greater degree.
Yeah, I want to clap about this all day long on the clergy side. And I've seen this with so many individuals where it seems terrifying. It feels like, oh, I'm being asked to do these things that are really tricky or really challenging. And I end up seeing individuals who are connected with their faith in an even stronger way after treatment. because it's not dictated by that OCD. It's actually about the core, like you said, Emily, tenets of their faith, their core beliefs. They're able to find meaning and connection and value as opposed to being driven so much by fear and urgency and shame and all of these other pieces that come up with OCD. So he did not talk too long. That was beautiful and wonderful. And I'll switch over to Patrick, who will kind of continue with this piece on reconnecting with God.
Yeah, so following up on all of that, I mean, really, your OCD does not care at all about you or your family or your friends, your faith, your God. OCD cares about OCD, and OCD wants one thing, and that is for you to do compulsions. I make a joke that if you ever go to Australia and you see a koala, koalas eat one thing, which is eucalyptus leaves. They eat it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And OCD eats one thing, and that's compulsions. And if you want to keep OCD alive, you keep doing compulsions because that's the food that it eats. And so all OCD cares about is trying to get you to do a compulsion so that it sticks around. So as I had kind of said earlier, you know, praying more is a problem in many ways. And of course, it's the first thing that people run to is, oh, if I pray more, then this will work out better. But again, the reason that it doesn't work out better is that those aren't actually prayers, right? Those are compulsions, and they are being done for one purpose and one purpose only, which is to alleviate the discomfort that the obsession has brought about. So if we look at obsessions as intrusive thoughts, images, or urges, not something being planted within us or something like that, something that we willfully made happen or anything of that nature, then we can recognize that they're not something that need a ton of attention. You know, one of the things we talked about earlier was intrusive thoughts. Every single person in the world experiences intrusive thoughts. I mean, it's not uncommon for people, they may be driving over a bridge and just have a weird thought about, well, what if I just turn the wheel really hard right now and the car went over the bridge or something like that? And you would think, why would I even think that? That's so, and you just drive on. But someone with OCD might say, I'm never going to drive over a bridge because now that I've thought that, what if it's going to make me do it? This idea that we have a thought action fusion, thoughts equal actions, thoughts are equal to actions, and even down to the basic notion that thoughts are good or bad versus what we contend from a therapeutic point of view that thoughts are absolutely neutral. There's nothing necessarily good or bad or right or wrong about them. They are thoughts. They are things that pop into our head. So therefore, it might be odd when you hear from a therapist that we want you to quote unquote pray less, but what we're really saying is we want you to do less compulsions, right? Because again, we don't believe these prayers that you're doing to neutralize these obsessions are actually prayers. We believe that they are compulsive things that are being done. And therefore, we're not asking you to do something to interfere with your relationship with whatever your belief system is. We're asking you to stop doing things that get in the way of your ability to interact with your God, your higher power in some way. And these compulsions aren't actually helping you to have an interaction with your higher power. You know, one thing that I joke about with people who have scrupulosity is they think, well, if I don't tell my higher power about what just happened, then they'll, you know, something bad will happen. And I'll always say, I find it interesting that the higher power you say that you believe is almighty and all powerful and all knowing. Last time I checked, almighty, all powerful, all knowing beings don't need reminders, right? If they're all knowing, a reminder is not necessary. They already know. So your higher power knows what obsessive compulsive disorder is, and therefore you don't need to remind them of something, right? You know? So if you kind of keep it that way, it helps people to be motivated to challenge sitting with obsessions, living with obsessions, instead of having to do something to neutralize them in any way. And of course, the other thing is kind of the pink elephant effect. If I tell you not to think of a pink elephant, that's probably the first thing that you're going to think of. And OCD does the exact same thing. Once you hope to not have an obsession, that is the thing that is going to pop into your head, is the obsession. And so then your OCD is like, oh, well, I told you not to think of it, but you did. So now you have to do a compulsion. And this cycle just keeps going. That cycle we talked about earlier just goes around and around.
Yeah, it's the notion. I mean, for me and for everyone I talk with every day, I would be willing to be stuck on anything else except this one thing. Why does it have to be this one thing? And it's like, well, that's the one thing you're not okay being stuck on. Right. It's the one thing that's the most significant, which again, as we think about why it makes so much sense that this can latch on to the faith component. So I know Mubeena is going to share a little bit about some of the cultural applications of this with us.
Yeah, and real quick, one more thing about reconnecting with religion and with our faith and with God, which is our ultimate goal as a Muslim. I just want to say, as a clinician, I've seen it happen where a person in the throes of OCD, in the throes of scrupulosity, will be so focused on the prayer that they'll miss the heart of the prayer. So it's almost like they're worshiping the faith rather than worshiping God. And once it starts to clear up, now they can pray and do a 5-minute prayer, and it has more meaning to them now. Now their spirituality has returned. So as people get treatment and as people get better, they do start reconnecting with religion, and it can be a really beautiful thing. So specific cultural applications. In our community, there's ways that OCD shows up that's unique. Ramadan is upon us. It's here. It's about a week and a half away. It's an exciting time for a lot of us. But there's an anticipation, I think, for everyone. Am I gonna make the most of this Ramadan, right? So as you can imagine, for a person with OCD, it's, am I going to make the most of this Ramadan? I need to make the most of this Ramadan. So the way it shows up for an individual with OCD, there can be an intense fear that they might accidentally break their fast. As mentioned before, did water accidentally go in my mouth when I'm fasting? Am I catching the blessings of Ramadan? Am I getting every moment out of this? That kind of leads to a general increase in anxiety as Ramadan's approaching and through it, and even afterwards. Did I make the most of my Ramadan? And then also we know that when we're fasting, let's be honest, we get hangry, everybody does, we get upset, we might even get a little bit depressed because our blood sugar is all wonky. So with a person with OCD, this can affect their mood and the loss of sleep too. We know when people don't sleep well, they can't fight the battles that they want to fight. So people with OCD might have more difficulty in Ramadan. Another specific cultural thing is, as Muslims, we have a big community component to our religion, going to Friday prayers, seeing each other at conferences, at talks, at the mosque, we're in and out of the mosques. So we might see people with OCD there. I'm told regularly, Mubeena, I saw a brother that was stuck in the bathroom. Water was everywhere and he was stuck there and he missed the prayer. So what can we do to support these individuals at the mosque? We got to maybe start having these conversations more on a community level within our communities and start supporting each other, because we see each other regularly at our community spaces. And the role of community and religious leaders. I hear from religious leaders and community leaders regularly. I'm sure Katie does also, that somebody came to me and they're asking these existential questions over and over again. We resolved it and they came back with a small nuance and what do I do? So there needs to be, we need to build in an awareness in our religious and community leaders about this disorder. And then within the home. So what I wanted to say about this is that many Muslims come from communal societies where it's not that, family is there until a person's 18 and then they move on and then there's that separation. With my clients, I see that family, both nuclear and extended, plays a big role in somebody's life throughout their lives. So we might see that accommodations kind of last beyond childhood. We might see that people are being pulled in to ask to reassure someone. I have a client who's an adult and her mother's in another country across the world. And my client calls in mom to kind of seek that reassurance from across the world. So that enmeshment can really play a role in somebody's treatment. And I wanted to pull in Emily here to talk more about accommodations.
Yeah, accommodations, the fact that it's across countries that's just really impressive, to be honest. calling it across. But yeah, I think the culture as a whole is very collectivistic. And I think as a whole, the family wants to help. They want to make it better. Let's fix the anxiety. And the traditional ways of fixing things and helping things, it's not necessarily going to be what helps OCD. And providing someone reassurance that they're a great person and that they didn't sin and that they'll be fine. While that seems like the best approach to take initially, it can actually just feed the anxiety more. And families come and they say, you know, they keep asking the same question over and over again, and I keep providing the same response. And I'm always so happy that my patients have that support, and we have to change the support quite a bit, right? How can we make this a little bit easier on the person who has OCD, but also easier on the family? And sometimes this involves creating an accommodation hierarchy. So oftentimes I'm asking family, how are you accommodating this person in your family? How are you making sure that they feel less anxiety? What are you saying to them on a daily basis that may make them feel better? So all of those things can really help us on the clinician side, help them almost create an accommodation hierarchy where we're like, okay, what accommodation are we going to take away today? How can we limit reassurance? Can they ask 3 reassurance questions this week that you will definitely answer, but the others you have to be like, you may or may not have done that. So it's really coaching the family in quite a different way than the support that they're typically willing to give. And I don't know if anyone else on this talk has any experience with that and creating a, you know, an accommodation hierarchy or really helping family understand that. But the goal is to show the person that has OCD that you have confidence that they can manage their anxiety and distress.
So I know we just talked about removing accommodations and reducing accommodations. I'm about to tell you the opposite, so just bear with me, okay? So as clinicians, sometimes we need to provide religious exemptions for individuals suffering from OCD. And we do this in a very systematic way, and it's a very temporary setup. So I'll give you an example to explain it well. If somebody has severe to moderate OCD, they might be spending their entire day trying to pray. So they might be spending 2 to 3 hours in the bathroom, cleaning themselves, making wudu, then coming out, and then in another hour actually doing the prayer, repeating the prayer. And then, you know, the next prayer is right around the corner. They might have a 5-minute break and then the next prayer comes in. So expecting a person with moderate to severe OCD to pray 5 times a day in their specified times might not be realistic. When we're talking about hierarchies and we're talking about small e and big RP, we might need to make those exemptions for a limited time. So for example, for a person you know, that has difficulty praying, we might reduce the praying to 3 times a day. They might pray Fajr at one time and Dhuhr and Asr together and Maghrib and Isha together. So now they're praying in clumps. That's too hard. We'll reduce it even more. But we talk about it and we make a goal. Like 6 months from now, the goal is that you'll be praying 5 times a day, and we're going to get there. We're going to build up your skills to tolerate distress so that you will be able to pray 5 times a day. As a clinician, and I know the other people on this panel, we talk to religious scholars to get those exemptions, to get advice of where's the sin and what's wrong and where's the flexibility. So we work with that flexibility to create these exemptions. My clients also have exemptions sometimes from fasting. So they're trying to fast. Sometimes they'll maybe fast like once a week with the goal that eventually they will be able to fast in Ramadan. Another thing we need to do in our community, as I mentioned before, is like using compassion with our community members, emphasizing that OCD is not a faith issue, that it's a mental illness, and it can be treated with a specialized treatment. So if we do see those community members out and about who are suffering, letting them know that we see them and that we know that they're struggling and that there's a way out. And I'm going to tag Emily again to tell us about when to refer to a specialist.
Yeah, so it's hard to sometimes know when to refer to a specialist, but I guess I want to normalize this to begin with. I specialize in OCD and anxiety, and I still find myself referring to higher levels of care. So referring out to a specialist can be a hard thing to come to terms with, but you also have to think about what is best for a patient. So I have referred to residential level cares and patient levels of care, not because I don't know about OCD, but because I recognize that the patient needs more than I can provide. So when do I tend to refer out to a specialist? If I realize that the symptoms and behaviors really aren't changing, I'm really over a period of time not seeing any reduction in compulsions, not seeing any reduction in anxiety. And we really use this, I tend to use a measure of some sort like the Y box to really continue to track this and see what's happening, right? Do they need a higher level of care? And sometimes this can be related to their ability to engage in ERP outside of our session. So oftentimes people come in to me and see me once a week, and I teach them what they should do. We make a plan for the week, but they don't do that plan. And so I really want us to imagine ERP and doing therapy similarly to like personal training. So for example, I really want abs. That would be fantastic. I'm going to hire a personal trainer and I see them once a week. They train me and then they give me a plan for the week. So if I only go to that personal training session and do nothing else, will I miraculously somehow have abs? I kind of wish that's the answer was yes to that, but it's not. So it's the same with treatment, right? You can come and see a specialist once a week and then they can give you a plan. But if you're not willing to work on ERP outside of that, then it's likely that you're not going to see much progress. So one thing that I also use as a way to note, do they maybe need a higher level of care, is if they're unable at all to engage in ERP outside of my session. I also think that just in general, we should be, if it is severe, if you have not been trained in ERP, if you do not have any experience with working with OCD, that's also just a sign that you possibly need to refer to a specialist or a higher level of care. And Mubeena, I don't know if you have anything else to say. I know there's maybe some religious leaders in the audience as well. So I don't know if we want to also tackle that and how, you know, sharing a faith with someone as a religious leader doesn't supersede the need for treatment or need for a specialist.
Yeah, and I think Patrick's going to pull that in with our last piece here as well of, and I know I'm mindful of time, folks, so thank you for, I know we started late, but thank you for hanging with us at the end here. Yeah, Patrick, integrating faith leaders, so important.
Do it quick here. Yeah, obviously, that's why we're here today. We want to get more and more people to understand that OCD is a serious mental health condition. It's not the thing of jokes that sometimes we hear, or, oh, we all have a little OCD, which we don't. It doesn't work that way. This really is a significant issue, affects about 2% of the population, and we would never wish this on anybody. So when faith leaders have a compassion, understanding, and recognize that OCD scrupulosity is what we call ego dystonic, meaning that it's not anything that we would ever want to have. We don't want these thoughts. We don't want these images. We don't want these urges. We wish they would go away. And we've been convinced by OCD that the best way to do that is to do compulsions. And we don't want our faith leaders being pulled into doing compulsions as well too. So this is why it's important for education, so that faith leaders can understand that sometimes on the surface level, what therapy may look like would be something that you would think, why would we want anyone to do this? This is wrong. But we hope for the blessing of faith leaders to realize that the entire goal of this treatment is to get people back to living the faith that they want to live. We would never ask anyone to do something blasphemous, but if a thought or image or urge is popped into someone's head, and we know that attempting to make it go away only makes it come back more, wouldn't it be best to allow someone to learn how they can handle that kind of thought or image or urge, instead of telling them to keep trying to make it go away, which will only keep it coming back? So when we can take the marriage of science and faith together, put them into a treatment that ultimately allows a person to live the faith life that they want to live. That's what we want. And we want the blessings of the faith community to be able to do that, because the people we're working with will look at times at the faith community and wonder, is this okay to do? And when we get that, yes, this is what you need to do in order to be back into the religious life that you want and that they want you to live in, then that's the greatest marriage we can have.
Thank you, Patrick. And just to close this out here, and I'll ask our moderators if we do have time for 1 or 2 questions, depending on who's able to stay on. But this is so important. These are such great folks in this field who have been able to share today. And the faith leader piece, I just want to say it's what Patrick was saying is so significant, where it's not the role of the faith leader, while not about reassurance, that affirmation is so incredibly important. It really, really is. It can be absolutely game-changing, life-changing during treatment. And both with folks I work with, but also in my own journey, hearing from my faith leaders, I believe that you can do it. I believe that you can take this leap of faith. I know that it's really hard, but I'm praying for you to be able to sit with that uncertainty. I'm going to walk with you through that. It makes such a difference. So I always say, it's of course not about reassuring and not about accommodating, but it really is about affirming, walking with, being a part of that process. And faith leaders can play such a critical role. And I wonder, as we kind of shift, I guess I'll ask our moderators, do we have time maybe for 1 question?
Yes. First of all, thank you for that great presentation. Can I have a round of applause for them? Yeah, does anyone have questions? Okay, we have 1 question here.
Thank you very much. I sincerely enjoyed this presentation, especially because it brings in the faith component, which is very important for all of us here. And I've never heard a presentation about the OCD, religious OCD. So this was really beautiful. Thank you very much. And I would like to hear more about, like, an example actually of how you would, what would you tell the family in terms of how the family is actually enabling the OCD behavior at home? Like, give us concrete, practical examples of what you would invite the family to actually do. And Mubeena, it was really lovely to see you there. Okay.
Now I'm wondering who that was.
You're a star, Mubeena. Congratulations. Well, I just love that you're here too, Mubeena, as a representative of the faith community as well too. I think that it's wonderful to have you here with us as a part of that. So thank you for being here. Yeah. Mubeena, do you want to give an example? Do you have one?
I was going to punt that one over to one of you guys.
I can think of one where if somebody is doing a voodoo, let's say, and they're asking other people to watch them to make sure that they did it exactly right, that would be an accommodation that a family member might be doing, saying, okay, I will watch you. And what you might see over time is that it just continues to get longer and longer. And you have to keep saying over, you did it okay, you did it okay, you did it. But what if I missed? But no, you did it okay, you did. And that goes to hours and hours sometimes for people. And then what we want to do is we want to reduce that person who's giving reassurance. There are 5 safety behaviors: avoidance, reassurance, distraction, substance use, and compulsions. And those are the things that we want to reduce actually over time, because those things might work immediately, but they don't work in the long term. And that's why we see people do compulsions for a longer and longer period of time. So maybe we start with, first, I'll watch you, but I'm not going to say anything. So even if you ask me if I did it right, I'm not going to say anything. And then I'll watch you from 10 feet away, and then 15, and then I'll be around the corner, but I'm not going to look at you while you do it. And then I'll be downstairs while you do it. And just putting more and more time and space into that experience till eventually you don't need that other person there in order to feel confident in the washing that you just did.
I'll add, that's an awesome example. I'll add just another one in kind of a different area, the blasphemous thought piece that we were talking about. We see this come up often where someone might have a particular intrusive thought. They might give a lot of value to that and go and ask a family member at home and say, I had this blasphemous thought. Do you think I just committed blasphemy in some way? Do you think God would be upset with me for this thought? Do you think it's okay? And the family response, again, it can be really challenging of wanting to comfort that person and wanting to say, no, that wasn't blasphemous. It's okay. Or it was just a thought, or we can walk with you through this. And it's really shifting that from offering the reassurance to saying, you know what, this sounds like it might be something that relates to your OCD right now. And I know it's really hard, but we're going to sit with this uncertainty together. And just shifting, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden you have to be mean and say, nope, I'm not talking to you, but it becomes, I'm going to be with you in the midst of this process, and I can't give you that reassurance right now.
OCD is never once to actually believe the reassurance that it's asked for, but it continues to ask for it anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for that great question.
Does anyone else have a question? No. Okay, other than that, another round of applause for the speakers. And with that, we'll end that session. And yep, thank you. Thank you to you guys.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Just to announce to you guys in person, we have lunch, and additionally, there's a CME credit form over there, and CEU credit form over there that you can fill out if you're a social worker. I believe you can fill that out, and then we'll take that to registration. So thank you.